How did Japan's mega tsunami of 2011 happen? The year 2011 started out like any other year for Japan. The country was coming off a difficult 2 years that saw political upheaval, economic uncertainty, and the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis still lingering. What nobody knew was that within a few short hours, all of that would seem like child's play compared to what was about to come. On March 11, 2011, at precisely 2:46 p.m. local time, a magnitude 9.0 earthquake struck off the coast of the country's main island of Honshu. It was the fourth most powerful earthquake ever recorded in history. People in Tokyo, more than 200 miles away from the epicenter, felt their buildings swaying violently from side to side. Some survivors would later say that it felt like the ground was shaking for 6 long, agonizing minutes. When the dust finally settled, the full extent of the damage became clear. Roads were split, houses had collapsed, and fires raged through the streets. However, for most people, their greatest fear at that moment was not the earthquake itself, but the rumbling of the ocean as it receded far out to sea. To everyone's horror, it was then that they heard the first news reports. A giant tsunami was heading their way. Moments later, the first of many massive waves crashed ashore. They were black, towering walls of water surging relentlessly toward the land, crashing through everything in their path. In some places, the waves reached a terrifying 40 meters or 130 feet high. That's equivalent to a 14-story building being flattened and washed away. The speed of the water was equally terrifying, racing inland at up to 50 miles per hour, which is faster than most highways. Within minutes, the water reached the coastal city of Sendai, where it tore apart the landscape, washing away ships, trains, cars, houses, and people. The closer you look at the damage caused by the tsunami, the more horrific it becomes. Homes were picked up and carried away as if they were made of paper. Roofs were torn off and strewn across the landscape like discarded trash. People were thrown around like rag dolls. Entire neighborhoods were wiped clean off the map. In some areas, the floodwaters were so powerful that they raced uphill, sweeping away everything in their path. As the sun set on March 11, 2011, the world got a glimpse of the devastation left behind by the tsunami. Cars and debris littered the streets, fires raged through the city, and the air was filled with the stench of death and decay. As survivors emerged from their homes, they were greeted by a scene of unimaginable horror. Many of their friends, neighbors, and family members were missing. Those who had survived the initial wave were now facing the daunting task of trying to piece together their shattered lives in the aftermath of this national tragedy. All around them, the physical wounds of the tsunami were evident, but the emotional scars would run just as deep. But during those dark hours of grief and despair, the Japanese people demonstrated an incredible level of heroism and resilience. Teachers guided their students uphill to safety, knowing that it might be the last thing they ever did. Firefighters refused to leave their posts, even as the tsunami waves crashed around them. Families were torn apart, making agonizing decisions about whether to save themselves or go back for their loved ones. Throughout this ordeal, they displayed incredible bravery and selflessness. Even in the face of certain danger, they put the needs of others before their own, showing a level of compassion and generosity that was truly inspiring. One of the hardest hit areas was the city of Rikuzen Takeda. It was almost completely obliterated by the tsunami, with only a handful of buildings remaining standing. Among them was the city hall, which miraculously withstood the full force of the waves. Inside the building, workers were desperately trying to contact their colleagues and loved ones, but there was no answer. Outside, the full extent of the damage was becoming increasingly clear. Homes and businesses were destroyed, cars were tossed around like toys, and the streets were covered in a thick layer of mud and debris. It was a scene of utter devastation. As the days went by, more and more people realized that their friends, neighbors, and family members were missing. Entire families had been wiped out by the tsunami, leaving behind only shattered belongings and broken dreams. For many survivors, the trauma of the event was just beginning. They had lost everything: their homes, their possessions, and in some cases, their loved ones too, and they were left to pick up the pieces and try to rebuild their lives from scratch. It was a Herculean task, but the Japanese people were determined to rise up to the challenge. With the support of the government and the international community, they began the long process of rebuilding their lives and their communities. It wasn't just the coastal areas that were affected by the tsunami. The nuclear disaster at Fukushima Daiichi added another layer of horror to this already nightmarish scenario. The floodwaters had crippled the facility and explosions rocked the plant as radiation leaked out and forced hundreds of thousands of people to flee their homes. It was a man-made catastrophe that threatened to overshadow the natural disaster that had struck just days before. But amidst the chaos and fear, there was hope. Men and women stayed behind to contain the disaster despite the risk of radiation poisoning. They were later called the Fukushima 50, and their bravery and selflessness saved countless lives. In the aftermath of this dual disaster, the people of Japan faced a long and arduous road to recovery, but they were determined to rebuild their lives and their communities. They came together in the face of adversity, sharing what little they had and helping each other to heal. It was a testament to the strength and resilience of the human spirit. In the days following the tsunami, entire towns held mass memorials to honor the victims who had been lost. People gathered together, sharing stories and memories of their loved ones while struggling to come to terms with their loss. They placed flowers and offered prayers at makeshift altars, seeking solace and comfort in their shared grief. The sense of community and shared suffering brought them together during this incredibly difficult time. But even in the midst of all this tragedy, there were glimmers of hope. As the dust began to settle and the full extent of the damage became clear, the outpouring of support from around the world was nothing short of remarkable. Countries sent aid and relief supplies, while individuals donated whatever they could to help those in need. It was a heartwarming display of humanity and compassion that gave the survivors hope for the future. Amidst the devastation, there were stories of heroism and selflessness that emerged. Ordinary people went above and beyond to help their neighbors and strangers alike, displaying incredible courage and kindness in the face of adversity. These acts of heroism, no matter how small, gave people hope that humanity could prevail even in the darkest of times. Amidst the wreckage and despair, the Japanese people demonstrated an incredible level of resilience. They came together to support one another, sharing resources and working tirelessly to rebuild their communities. They faced the daunting task of clearing away the debris and restoring essential services, all while grieving the loss of their loved ones and their homes. It was a testament to their strength and determination that they refused to give up in the face of such overwhelming adversity, and through it all, the spirit of hope endured. As the sun began to shine again and the birds started to sing, the survivors knew that they had to keep going. They had to find a way to move forward and rebuild their lives. They clung to the belief that better days were ahead and that they would eventually overcome this tragedy and emerge stronger than ever before. One of the most heartbreaking aspects of this tragedy was the toll it took on the mental health of the survivors. Many of them suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, and depression as they struggled to cope with the trauma of the event. But they didn't give up. They sought out counseling and support groups to help them process their grief and move forward. With time and support, many of them were able to find a way to live with the scars of the tsunami, both visible and invisible. As the years passed, the people of Japan began to rebuild their lives and their communities. They created new seawalls and warning systems to protect against future tsunamis and honored the victims of the disaster with memorials and museums. They also used their experience to raise awareness about the importance of disaster preparedness and the impact of climate change. The legacy of the 2011 Tohoku tsunami and nuclear disaster was a painful one, but the people of Japan refused to let it define them. They chose instead to use it as a defining moment that shaped their resilience, their unity, and their commitment to never giving up in the face of adversity. Today, the prefecture of stands as a testament to the human spirit. Cherry blossoms once again bloom in the towns and cities that were devastated by the tsunami, symbolizing the return of life and the power of nature to heal. Memorials and museums have been built to honor the victims of the disaster and remind future generations of the importance of remembrance and resilience. The people of have turned their tragedy into an opportunity for growth, creating a stronger, more resilient community that is prepared for whatever challenges may come its way. Please like and most important, please subscribe. Help a survivor's dream become a reality.